I started this video with a book stack that was a fourth of this size, and as I kept talking, I kept remembering, oh, what about this book and this book? Now the list is like this long. I have a lot of recommendations for you for this video. Grab a drink, get comfy, let's talk about Gothic literature. Some of my favorite books I've ever read fall into this category. It's sometimes also referred to as Gothic horror. It's been around for an extremely long time, and I will never get tired of it. There is something about the story revolving around these ancient houses and the melodrama of it all, the secrets, the fear, the dread that's felt throughout the story. It explores darker themes. The writing is extremely atmospheric and beautiful. I have noticed that whenever a lot of people talk about Gothic literature, they mainly just focus on classics, which I love classics, and I do have a couple on my list. However, there are so many other books within Gothic literature that could be fantasy, short story, magical realism, contemporary fiction, historical fiction. I've read a lot of them, and I would love to recommend some to you so that hopefully you can find a new favorite within the list. So before getting started, a couple of things. One, this video is going to be really long because I not only have these books, but also the books behind me on my bookshelf. A lot of them are Gothic. This shelf alone only has all of my vampire books, and I will be including those as well. It's going to be a long video. I will do timestamps for everything. And the final thing is, it is a cloudy day, but the sun continues to come in and out, so the lighting might change a little bit like it is right now. Bear with me. I really wanted to go through all of these book recs, so let's get into it. I really only have one book that would fall under short story, and that is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez. I've talked about this book, I think, in my last video, or my second to last video that I posted. I'm not gonna harp too much on it, but this short story collection is set in Buenos Aires, but in a way that you haven't heard about Buenos Aires before. Mariana Enriquez turns it into a dark and twisted place full of madness, and explores a lot of themes of fear, isolation, desire, and really explores how these feelings that people have can really push us over the edge. This is leaning more contemporary Gothic. So I wanted to start with this one because you can get a little taste of what Gothic literature is. It's more contemporary. You can only read bite-sized stories and see if it's something that you might be interested in. Take that back. I found two more short stories. So these are both classics. However, Daphne du Maurier is one of my all-time favorites when it comes to Gothic literature. And I have a couple of her short stories to talk about. The first one is The Breakthrough. This is all that it is, and it talks about a scientist questioning life and death. This short story collection is called Don't Look Now. It is said that she just let her imagination run free with these, and she took a really dark twist to the everyday, mundane type of life. The two short stories in this that I have read are Don't Look Now and The Birds. Now we can start with some of the fantasy books. I do have a couple. The one that I don't actually have a physical copy of is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. This one I recommend as an audiobook. That's how I listened to it. It is extremely atmospheric, as are many of these, but I think the writing was so beautiful. I felt like I was escaping into this dark fantasy world that completely compelled me, and I was just lured into the spell that is this woman. In this book, we follow a bridegroom who fell in love with this mysterious heiress. Their love is all consuming, it's intense, they have this deep desire for one another, and they are in a very big honeymoon phase until this heiress receives a phone call from a family member. She has to return back to her childhood home. Before they go, the big thing that the bridegroom promised with this heiress is that he will never bring up her past. He cannot question anything about her past. He, at the time, didn't see any issue with this. Why would he? So he agrees. They get married, they're in the honeymoon, and then they go back to the childhood home where it feels like this house is almost speaking to him and trying to lure him in to uncover all the secrets that she has been hiding from him. This was such an enjoyable audiobook. It felt like escapism every time that I read it, and I wanted to stay there. And especially within the first few chapters, I wanted to stay there. I didn't want to leave this little bubble that they had created together, and then it popped, and I was not expecting that ending. Next up, we have The Death of Jane Lawrence. This one I didn't personally love all too much, but I still wanted to recommend it in case someone else might be interested in it. In this one, we follow a woman named Jane. Jane is not big on having a marriage and family. She knows that she needs it. So in her mind, the most logical way to go about it is a marriage of convenience. And she ends up getting a doctor. He's very introverted, to agree to this marriage of convenience. The only rule is she cannot go visit him at Linridge Hall, which is where he goes every night. He's almost compelled to go every night, which she finds a bit odd because he is a doctor. So if there's a patient that needs him, why would he not be there? It is a marriage of convenience, so she agrees. They end up getting together. A couple of weird things start to happen. So even though this didn't necessarily work for me, hopefully it works for you. This next one was a duology. It is now a trilogy. I don't think there's anything after this, but it is Belladonna. I have Foxglove. The third book I think is called Wisteria. I'll pop a picture up just so you can see it. This all starts with a character named Signa. Signa is an orphan until she sees her extended family called the Hawthorns. The Hawthorns live in this big state. One of the Hawthorns is very sick. There's this big mystery that Signa is trying to uncover to support them. Death is a character in this book. This ending had me waiting every day for Foxglove to come out. Funny enough, I haven't picked it up since, but that has more to do with my endless TBR and not so much to do with the book. It feels very forbidden. It's dark. I could picture every single one of these scenes. Look at how beautiful these covers are. Look at Belladonna. Now we can get into some retelling. One is Comfort Me with Apples. I can't give too much away, but basically this is a really popular retelling. It has a perfect suburban bow wrapped around the retelling. It has some similarities to the film Don't Worry Darling. It is a quick read and a very enjoyable one. The other retelling is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. This one obviously is a retelling of the Juniper Tree. Follow these witch sisters. I did a tandem read of this, so I listened to the audiobook as I was reading the physical book. I have very little left, but I wanted to share in case someone else was interested. Following Ava Reed as an author, they also just released Lady Macbeth. This is my Aardvark Book Club edition. I always have a code in my description if you want to try out Aardvark Book Club for the first time. This is my pick for September. I'm almost done with it again, but I will talk about it more in depth with my reading wrap up. I'm going to group these as societal pressures and expectations placed on women. I think that's how I'm going to categorize it as. I've mentioned Rouge before on my channel. This book focuses on the beauty standards and expectations that society places a lot on women, with a heavy focus on your looks and your beauty, specifically throughout skincare, with this main character and their mother, who's now deceased. She goes back to where her mom lived to gather up her belongings, and when she is there, she is led down this path of roses to this mysterious gathering that just wraps her up whole and completely consumes her. The imagery in this and the descriptions I just completely fell in love with. Although it is very contemporary, the roots of the story are embedded in Gothic literature. There are so many odes to it, writing, imagery, unsettling fear that you have, and it just continues to get bigger and bigger as you read the story until you reach that ending. And although it is terrifying, you can't look away. But within the garden, I just finished reading this in my 24-hour reading challenge video for the fall. This book is set in 1948. We follow a character named Irene. Irene has had 5 miscarriages. It's this pressure that looms on her, so much so that her and her husband travel up to this estate where a lot of other women who have also had miscarriages are staying, and it is hosted by these 2 doctors who have a very experimental type of treatment, but their goal is to give these women babies. These are characters that are in an extremely vulnerable position. They know what it feels like to have this loss, emotionally, mentally, physically have to go through the motions of losing their child. This is more of a Gothic, historical, literary, feminist take, all wrapped up into this book. Commentary on this is really interesting because it focuses on the complexities of these women, also the pressure that they feel with the loss of this autonomy, how psychologically challenging all of this really is, and it has a really dark and sinister twist on it. It's commentary that's really prevalent to our current political situation. I would recommend the audiobook for this one. Now let's get into my vampire books. There are quite a few of these, so I'm going to try to just do a speed round through them. The one and only classic is Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Whenever I talk about this book, I always urge to get this specific copy. This is an edition that is edited by Carmen Maria Machado. I first read this as a library checkout, and I wasn't able to fully enjoy it until I went and I picked up this book. The introduction provides so much more insight with the history and the inspiration to this book, the reason why the author even went about writing this book, and there are these really beautiful illustrations shown all throughout. some of my favorites. It adds so much more to the story and I absolutely love it. So I always encourage, if you're going to pick up this book, get this specific edition. This is definitely one of my favorites, and this inspired many other books. As I mentioned, this is inspired by Carmilla. This is the classic, and this is more of the contemporary twist. Education in Malice. This is by S.T. Gibson. S.T. Gibson is one of my favorite authors when it comes to vampire books specifically. So Carmilla and Laura are actually college students in this. They meet because they are both in this poetry seminar. They both want to be the top student in this poetry seminar. They start to compete with one another. They are introduced and led into this very intense academic world, and the story goes from there. I liked it. I didn't personally love it because I do prefer more of a historical setting when it comes to my vampire books, but this was still enjoyable. The cover is beautiful. I love S.T. Gibson. I'll read anything by S.T. Gibson, and if you like more contemporary set stories, then this one would be perfect for you. The other S.T. Gibson that I have on this list is, I think, my all-time favorite vampire book. This is A Dowry of Blood. This is what I'm talking about. This has all the elements that I love. It is set during the Victorian times. It's so romantic. The melodrama seeps through the book entirely. This is set in Constanza's perspective. Constanza was one of Dracula's brides. This is a polyamorous relationship. There's a long list of trigger warnings, so please do be mindful. Look them up before you get into this book. This was just so intense and all-consuming, and heavy desire and obsession, manipulation. This book was a lot, but I think the execution, the writing, the way that these characters were built, and in between all of that, it's the activities that they did. They would go to these beautiful balls in their gowns and corsets, and that's how they would meet. And these very lavish dinners, and at night they would write by candlelight, and they would do everything by candlelight. I want to do everything by candlelight. I want to walk around the hall with the candle. And that's exactly what they did in this. And they did a whole lot more than that. So I highly recommend this one. I would recommend a tandem read. The audiobook is delicious. Last time I checked, it was free on Audible to download. Not 100% sure if that's still the case, but I do recommend checking. And then you should pick up a physical copy because, I mean, it's beautiful. Next up, we have House of Hunger. Technically not vampires. There is blood sucking. There are these two different parts of the world. The people that live in the south are very poor. They are struggling financially and just in general with life. And then there are people in the north that live lavish. They have everything that they could want and need and all the money in the world to go around, and they're divided into these houses. So our character goes to the House of Hunger after she sees a job posting to become a blood maid. When you are a blood maid, you basically just go, you live there, you're contract for a couple of years. You just have to give this very rich woman your blood. The more trauma you've experienced, the better your blood tastes, and they have this idea in the north that the blood is what's going to help you live longer, happier, healthier. What could go wrong if you're just giving your blood to a very rich older woman? This book had a lot of mystery, very sensual moments, and the horror element in this really delivered. Don't know what I'm talking about. This book was inspired by Elizabeth Bathory, which was a Hungarian countess. Just Google that name. Enjoy your deep dive. I really like this book. Next up, we have Thirst, which if you want a timeline that can kind of give you the best of both worlds, this is broken up into two parts. So the first part is set in the 19th century with parts of Europe and then traveling to Buenos Aires. Part 2 is set in present-day Buenos Aires. We follow two different types of characters. Part 1 and Part 2, although are different, there is this thread that connects them together in a really unique way that I just did not see coming. The first parts have the moments that I love in a lot of my Gothic books, with the writing and the descriptions and the details. It was a really big page turner for me. And then Part 2, you get a much more emotional side full of empathy and understanding and trying to get to the root of where you're from. I think they both paired really nicely. So if you want a little bit of both, then I recommend you read Thirst. Finally, we have Interview with the Vampire. This again is another classic, and the reason why I even picked this up is because I was watching the TV show, which I highly recommend that you do. It was incredible. I am reading this for my book club. I have 30 pages left to finish, but I wanted to bring it up. We have a couple different vampires in this. They all feel very differently with being a vampire, how they go about that. If you liked the show, you're definitely going to like the book. And lastly, to wrap up this video, we can get into the classics. These are the ones that are talked about a lot when you talk about Gothic literature, like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. If you want something similar to Frankenstein, but a bit more contemporary, focusing on a couple different themes, then Monstrilio would be a perfect substitute for this. A staple as well are the Bronte sisters. I have not gotten around to Wuthering Heights. It is on my list for this year. This is one by Charlotte Bronte that I haven't seen talked about too much. It is called Villette. This is a chunkier book. I'm still making my way through it myself. If you read and loved Jane Eyre like I did, which I do have here, and you're looking for something along similar lines, romance, then I would recommend Villette. What Daphne du Maurier is most commonly known for is Rebecca, which features that big estate that's crumbling, full of mystery. If you've read this, you've seen this everywhere, you want something different that is a bit similar, then I recommend My Cousin Rachel. It has everything that Daphne du Maurier was so well known for. Some characters are being deceitful. We don't entirely know which ones. This one was enjoyable as an audiobook as well. Also, before I leave the thought of Rebecca, I also just wanted to quickly mention two books that follow very similar blueprints to this, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and then The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. So if you read this, you loved it, you want something a bit similar, a bit more contemporary, then I recommend those two. I listened to both as an audiobook and I really loved both of them. This classic author holds a very special place in my heart. I think about both of these books very, very, very often, and that is Shirley Jackson. Specifically, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, as well as The Haunting of Hill House. These are both special editions. I love both of these stories. Within both of these, the way that Shirley Jackson writes these characters full of paranoia, isolation. They feel like they are just spiraling out of control in this world that they thought that they knew. A lot of characters are coming in and you don't really know their true intentions. This focuses more on this bond between two sisters. They are the only ones left after their family was poisoned. Mary Catherine just wants to protect her sister and take her and travel with her to the moon, and will do all of these spells to keep them together. And then The Haunting of Hill House, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have watched and loved the show. However, the book itself is very different from the show. I enjoy both of them separately, and I've not been able to stop thinking about The Cup of Stars. I have to hold it to the side so you can still see me. This ended up being all the books that I talked about in this video. I really hope you're able to find a book in here that you enjoy. If you have any Gothic literature recommendations that I missed, please let me know. Comment them down below. If you have a favorite, share that as well. And actually, if I was able to convince you to read one of these books, please let me know which one it is. Thanks for watching. Okay, I'm done.